Welcome to Father Matt's Bible Studies and Sermons videos and podcast. In today's Bible study, we study the Pentateuch, beginning with Genesis and continuing with Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. God bless you and hope you enjoy the Bible study. All right, let us pray. Almighty God, we ask your blessing on our Bible study this morning. Send your Holy Spirit to be with us as we continue to read through the book of Genesis. Also bless those who were killed and whose families are mourning in the plane crash yesterday or last night in D.C. All this we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, we are going to continue Genesis. We've read chapters 1 and 2 and 3, and the hold in your head to a degree the concept of the two, or there's actually four, but the multiple strands of storytellers. We'll see as we go through that some of the same themes and plot lines pop up. And you don't necessarily have to think about it in terms of multiple storytellers, but they tend to be kind of obvious which one is which as you go through. And so a couple things that you probably haven't noticed will pop up, but um, we will address them when we get to them. So let me share Safari. All right, can you see my screen? Can you still see my screen if I do it over here? Yes, no?
I've got it.
Yes.
Yeah, Genesis 4.
Great. Because now I'm looking forward. Okay. Let's see. This section is kind of long-ish, but let's not sure why it's doing that. James, can you read the first paragraph? Just the first paragraph.
Yes, the first paragraph. Okay. Cain murders Abel. Now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. Next, she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel, for his part, brought of the firstlings of his flock their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it.
Great. Okay. So this is the setting of our Cain and Abel scene. Anybody have any idea or any random wild guess why Abel's offering, this is the big question everybody asks, right? Why is Abel's offering accepted and Cain's is not? Anybody have any guess whatsoever? And I'll preface it by a guess that might make some sense actually was in what we read last week, or a root of a guess.
Quantity.
Do you say that again?
One gave more than the other. Quantity. Maybe Cain kept some for himself. Hard to
Yeah,
tell.
I don't think it says that though, right? It simply says that, uh, well, it simply says that in the course of time, Cain brought the Lord an offering from the fruit of the ground, and Abel, for his part, brought of the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. So that could be one thing. It could be quality, perhaps, right? It could be one thing, and there's not an explanation here. So like you can run yourself in circles trying to figure out what it might be. But in terms of the plot narrative, one thing that it might be that actually will come up again, hopefully today when we get to the end of chapter 5, is do you remember what got cursed earlier?
And
Ground?
It was the ground, right? The ground got cursed. And it's
Yeah.
not guaranteed, but as we read through, one of the themes that pops up in this particular storyteller's narrative, the Cain and Abel, the Adam and Eve, it's one kind of story, and it goes all the way to into the flood story and beyond. But the ground is an issue, and when we get to Noah, um, there's another reference to the ground that pops up, and it's in relation to the ground being cursed. So it is possible. I don't know. It's another possibility that most people don't think of, that it could be that his offering is from the ground, and the ground is cursed, whereas Abel's are from the flock. For what that is. Another thing that's new here um, is, have we had anybody sacrificing anything before?
no,
Yet, right? No.
no.
This will be a pretty regular theme that we have. And again, one of the strands of this particular storyteller of in Genesis is that it is perfectly fine and normal to sacrifice animals. And when we get to the flood, you will note that one of the storytellers builds that into the narrative, that there are a number of clean and unclean animals that are put in. And you'd think last two times ago when we talked, and we'll go through this more, but one of the features of one of our Genesis storytellers is using the Lord regularly. That person also has no problem with people sacrificing regularly, and that is a feature of positive religion, is that you sacrifice regularly to the Lord. The other source that we've encountered so far, or storyteller is a good way of putting it, you may remember I talked about as being like a priestly storyteller, and dealt with calendar and this or that. And in your head, you probably think, well, that's obviously the person that cares about sacrifice. But it actually isn't. The priestly source doesn't want you sacrificing anywhere outside of Jerusalem. So that doesn't happen until way later, which is kind of an interesting thing. The priestly source's whole point is actually to focus more on the temple cult and things like that. Um, so that's just something to keep in mind. So we have from the get-go here, without any command to do this, right? A sacrifice being offered. And it's just taken for granted that Cain and Abel provide their sacrifices. And something we will see later is um, generally, the sacrifices of an animal and its fat portions are more highly regarded by the temple cults and the the view of God and that sort of thing than the grain offerings are. But these types of offerings go all the way through. Um, Generally, as we get much later, grain offerings tend to be things that poorer people provide because that's all they have, and more wealthy people tend to provide animal offerings. But these two people, Cain and Abel, are brothers, so there shouldn't be any economic difference between them. So that may be another possible feature of why Cain's uh, sacrifice is not accepted. But at the end of the day, and this is worth noting, it's all just guesswork, because it never actually says in the text this is why it was rejected. And a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it might be, but it's just guesswork. So two things I would give you is the difference between um, grain offerings and animal offerings, and the whole business of the ground being cursed earlier is a theme that most people tend not to notice, but it is a pretty regular theme that pops up in this particular strand of Genesis. The guy, or the storyteller that likes to talk about the Lord, also likes to talk about how the ground is cursed. All right. I mentioned this last time. Cain, his name means, I think it's produced or purchased or something like that. Produced. Yeah, his name means produced. And we get a definition of that. The Bible does this all the time, is that I name my child so and so. And it's because this happened at this point. And there's a little bit of chicken and egg sometimes going on with these namings. Sometimes it's obvious that the person's name is whatever it is, and the person says it's because this happened or because I went to this place. I would argue that it's probably unlikely that anybody actually recorded the quotation from Eve. Like, I'm just going to throw that one out there. Like, if you think about that, um, it's probably that the name comes first and the story about Adam and Eve and why Cain means what it is comes second, right? Um, Abel, and I said this briefly last time, Abel is the same word that pops up in the wisdom literature when, vanity of vanities or everything is nothingness and that sort of thing. So Abel's name is not translated or told to us, but his name basically means nothingness. And his role in this is to get killed in the story, which is kind of sad. But that may be one of those puns that is told in the story. And if you knew Hebrew, you get it. But if you don't get it. Any questions on this first part? Great. Okay. Let's move into the next thing. I didn't talk about this. I have no explanation of this. A lot of people love to spend time figuring out what this means. I couldn't tell you. If you do well, sin is lurking at the door. I think that the best I can do with this is that Cain has a chance not to do something bad here, and he chooses to do something bad. Right? He's given the opportunity straight up from the Lord not to do something bad, and the next passage tells us how his reaction is. Bob Landis, can you read the next paragraph, starting with Cain said to his brother? You're muted, Bob, you're muted.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go out to the field." And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer of the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me." Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance." And the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who came upon him would kill him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden.
Great. Okay. That's the whole Cain and Abel story, for what it's worth. Couple of fairly well-known bits in here, but I'll just go through it. I hope that you noticed after I mentioned it that there's a lot of ground stuff going on here, right? And so immediately after the Lord talks to Cain, and again, this strand of Genesis, this storyteller of Genesis, has no problem with a very anthropomorphic the Lord, right? Walks in the garden. We'll see later, like closes the ark on Noah. Uh, has no problem talking to Cain, right? Like we've left the Garden of Eden, remember? Like that happened. They got kicked out. So now they're out, but the Lord is still wandering around or just talking to Cain and Abel. In this case, Cain. I think the story is usually called Cain and Abel, but if you actually paid attention, Abel has zero role in the story other than to present his offering and get killed. He never talks. He never has any interaction. He just gets killed. And uh, again, another feature of this particular strand is that God is pretty anthropomorphic, as in like seems to be wandering around with them. And again, this is the same strand that the sort of the dust human thing was made, and God breathed into the dust and created Adam. All right, very famous line, right? Am I my brother's keeper? Gets taken into a lot of different movies and things like that, at least the ones I watch. Um, And uh, here's an interesting one. Does God know where Abel is? Right? There seems to, again, this particular strand does seem to uh, bring up some interesting questions. This is the same one that said, why aren't you wearing clothes? Right? Or why are you wearing clothes? Who told you to do this? Right? There's who told you to eat the fruit? If you actually think about it for a second, um, does the Lord even know the answer until he's told? It's not crystal clear for what that's worth. Or he's very good at asking rhetorical questions. So one or the other, right? Um, where's your brother Abel? Well, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Well, the Lord does seem to kind of know. What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground, right? First ground in this part of it. We got one earlier. So the ground pops up again. Um, you're cursed from the ground. Now we've got a shift. Earlier it was just the ground that was cursed, but now Cain is cursed, right? Because of what he did. Um, and the end result will um, be that the ground will no longer yield its strength to you. This actually looks very familiar because we almost got the same curse earlier from the ground, right? That you weren't going to be able. It was going to be hard work, but I guess the point here is going to be it's going to be even harder, and that he's going to be a fugitive and want. So that's the difference here is that now it's not just the ground that's cursed. Now Cain is cursed, and he's going to have to wander. And uh, Cain replies, "But my punishment is greater than I can bear." He's been driven from the soil again, same kind of ground imagery. Uh, and this is one too. I shall be hidden from your face. Right? He's not going to get to talk to God anymore, and anyone's going to try to kill him because people know what's going to go on. Uh, or this is actually a leap. God doesn't actually say this, but I guess it follows from the fugitive part of it, right? Um, and then we get this weird mark of Cain thing. Again, that's another thing that people try to figure out what it is on its, and I guess the pun is intended, on its face. It probably is a physical mark of some sort that either everybody has or a particular tribe of people has. Somebody or some group of people probably had. You can think of maybe a tattoo, or you can think of some sort of uh, visible disfigurement, I or some sort of thing that people do to themselves. I don't know, but probably the mark is something visible that God has put on Cain, and what it was has been lost, I think, in history in terms of what it. And I think when this is written, or when it's originally told, if it, assuming it's an oral story uh, originally they probably would have known what it was for what that's worth, but we've lost that. Um, all right, Nod.
Well,
Yeah,
this is where suddenly you have more people in the world because you have Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and suddenly who's supposed to come upon it?
that's a great point. Yeah, and we'll get more of that in a second, right? Like, who does Cain marry? Where do they come from? We'll see in a second. But yes, that's a really great point. Um, where's anybody, other people? And it's at this point, it's like, okay, there's going to be more people. We know that because we're here today. But as the story unfolds, it's like all of a sudden he goes to a city. We'll see in a second, right? He
Sure.
settles somewhere else. There's going to be people in where he ends up settling. And uh, I think I said this last time, but I will reiterate it. When you encounter things that don't necessarily make sense in terms of the narrative, if the Bible doesn't care, there's not really much you can do about it, right? The Bible doesn't care that from a logical standpoint, we had two people and all of a sudden we've got people all over the place. Uh, and the uh, the original thing from the first chapter of Genesis, it just says humanity in general. It doesn't say one or two people. Again, a different kind of story, but the Bible doesn't seem to care how the world gets populated, uh, after Adam and Eve in terms of this particular story. It just seems to be like, all right, well, and it did. And we'll see how that happens in the next passage. But there's not a whole lot you can do about it. And, there's probably a lot of time spent by people on trying to figure this out, but not much you can do about it for what that's worth. But it is worth pointing out. All right, Nod. Let's see if there's a note on Nod. Nod. Wandering. So the land of Nod is the land of wandering, right? That's kind of cool. East of Eden, that gets, is there a movie or a book or something like that that's named after this?
There is a movie, yeah.
So that, where is Eden? If you remember, Eden is somewhere that we can't get to in the East. Like a constant of it is that the land of Eden is in the East somewhere, and Cain goes even further east, right? We, and we are the people that are telling this story, we are not in that east. We have come from the east. That's a pretty regular part of this story is that people came from the east and got to where we are now. And so Cain and the land of Nod is even further east. It's away. All right. Okay, this is JD. You get to read this because you just talked about the out of thin air reality of people. So jump into, let's see how long to go. End of the chapter. Go to the end of the chapter.
Okay.
Oh, I can get to it. Sorry.
Where am I going?
Right there. Okay, Cain.
Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and named it Enoch after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael the father of Methuselah. And
Nope, that's
Methuselah. And Methuselah the father of Lamech. And Lamech took two wives. The name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zillah. Adah bore Jabal. He was the ancestor of those who live in the tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jabal. He was the ancestor of all those who play the lyre and the pipe. Zillah bore Tubal Cain, who made all kinds of bronze and iron tools. The sister of Tubal Cain was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold. Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another child instead of Abel, because Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. At that time, people began to invoke the name of the Lord.
Great. Okay. Couple of things. So, where did she come from? Is a question that the Bible doesn't care, so there's no answer on that. This is the first of many, 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 many genealogies in the Bible, right? This is the first. There are lots. The different sources and storytellers throughout the Bible, all the way up to and through the New Testament, love genealogies. There are two genealogies for Jesus in the gospel narratives, one in Luke, one in Matthew. They do not agree with each other, for what that's worth. Christians and scholars have attempted to figure out what that means and how to deal with that. In my opinion, the easiest way of thinking about it is that there are multiple people telling the story, and the information that they have doesn't always add up, and that's that. But there's multiple stories going on. We will see in a little bit, I think, a second genealogy that gets us down from Adam and down eventually to Noah. The point here, though, and it mostly is generally these genealogies are similar but not identical, and that's another thing that happens here. So when we go a little later, you'll see a lot of these same names or very similar versions of them pop up in the next chapter, for what that's worth. Um, the name Enoch will show up. Some of you may know Enoch who walked with God. Not yet. That's a different Enoch, or maybe it's the same Enoch with a different narrator telling us. But we get from Cain the first city. I mean, that's pretty impressive, right? A better question than where did Cain's wife come from, right? Is she bore Enoch, and he built a city, like boom, right off, like bang. So for who? Well, for all the people that were there. So he's the first city builder. And he's also the first one that names things after himself. This is a thing that still happens to this day, right? People love naming things after themselves. Um, then we get a few more people. Not sure what these names mean, um, but we fast track to Lamech, which is interesting, or Lamech, or whatever it is. So these people are less important for the story, but they're basically part of our genealogy. And then we get a story about I'm going to say Lamech, and so we've now had in this strand we've had detailed stories twice, right? The first detailed story was well, we've got the creation story, but the first detailed story about people was the Adam and Eve and the snake story, and the point there was that they did not do what they were supposed to do. Second detailed story, Cain and Abel. And Cain kills Abel, and the point there is that Cain didn't do what he was supposed to. The progression here is they're getting worse, right? So as we get to this person, Lamech, first thing he does is took two wives. This is the first time somebody seems to have done this. Is it a good thing? It's not clear, right? But if I was going to guess, um, I would say that the fact that it gets attached to somebody who is really bad news in the Bible is probably not the best thing, for what that's worth. So it's worth, as you go through, seeing who did what, right? Enoch built a city. Great. Lamech takes two wives. Interesting. We get their names. There's no judgment on that, for what it's worth, but generally he's not a good guy. Then it's through Cain and his ancestors that a whole bunch of people that basically do important things. He's the ancestor of those who live in tents and have livestock. That would be the like the Bedouins, basically, right? The shepherds that are out. Um, Never mind that Abel had livestock earlier, right? Never mind that. Again, the Bible doesn't care. This is not the ancestor of generally people that just take care of animals. This is the people that live out in tents in the middle of the desert. So this is an example of where did those people come from? Well, that's where they came from. They came from Jabal, and I don't know Hebrew at all well enough, but the odds are decent that there's some possible play on this in livestock or tents or something like that. Um, Jubal, you actually know a word that matches up with this. It's called jubilation, right? So Jubal is the one that plays. How come some people play music? Well, that's from his Jubal. He's the ancestor of everybody. I mean, that's kind of interesting if you think about it, right? Every single person that plays music comes from this person. I don't think we think of it like that, right? We don't think of it in that same way. But he's the ancestor of everybody who plays music. And then we get Tubal Cain, who makes all kinds of bronze and iron tools. Okay, so the Iron Age and the Bronze Age have just instantly happened. Great, that's wonderful. He's there. And the sister, and this is we don't get that many stories of women, but the sister is named as well. So that's the family. And now we hear about Lamech. And he says to his wives, blah, blah, blah. I've killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. So his claim to fame is that he kills somebody, for what that's worth. And again, where did this guy come from? Right? That's again we'll call that the JD question throughout the Bible. Is where did he come from? We don't know. Was it part of his family or somebody that lived in the city that just popped up? We don't know. But the point of this is primarily it explains where did these people come from? Where did they come from? Where did this come from? Why do we have cities? Because somebody built it. It's fine. And the end result here is that they're still bad, right? So our creation seems to have gotten worse as we've um, gone down, for what that's worth. And then the last little bit here is Seth is born, and this gets us another line for what that's worth. Seth means appointed or resembles it. And so it's a play on word. God has appointed for me another child instead of, it's probably a pun more than it is a meaning, instead of Abel, because Cain killed him. So Seth also bore a son and named him Enosh. And at that time, people began to invoke the name of the Lord. This is very important, right? We haven't actually had this happen, but if you think about it, we've had a couple of things that seem like it ought to have happened. Cain and Adam and Eve were talking with the Lord, right? And Abel and Cain were offering sacrifices. So this gives, what this does is it generalizes it, that this is functionally where our religion comes from, right? Iron and bronze and music and cities um, and livestock and people that live in tents, they all come out of Cain. But out of this line, Seth, comes the people, our people, that call on the name of the Lord, right? Which is the Israelite crowd. What is fascinating about this, and this is where you get into um, kind of the different strands of the story. The other source or storyteller that we've been dealing with so far, our priestly source friend, does not want this to happen until Moses at the burning bush. Right? That is way, 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 way. We don't, from that storyteller's standpoint, we don't know who this person is, we don't know who this God is, or by name, until we get to the burning bush. And in fact, um, in the burning bush story, Moses says, "Who are you?" And God says, "I am the Lord, and you actually have known me, and everybody has known me as God Most High." But I've El Shaddai. I've been El Shaddai and that's another name we'll get. I've been El Shaddai all the way up until Moses, and now I'm the Lord. In this storyteller, it goes all the way back to the beginning, for what that's worth. Okay. All right. Any questions on Cain and Abel and Lamech and or Tubal Cain or Jubal or Jabal? Any of them? All right. Okay. Let's keep moving. And Melissa, you're there. I can see you. Can you read the first one, two, three? Go to here. This is fine. Go to verse 11.
Okay. This is the list of the descendants of Adam. When God created humans, he made them in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and called them humans when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he became the father of Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. Seth lived after the birth of Enosh 807 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he became the father of Kenan. Enosh lived after the birth of Kenan 815 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died.
Great. Okay, pause there. If you were doing a movie version of this, we have changed narrators. It's actually jarringly noticeable when you stop and think about it. We've had nice storytelling and this sort of thing, and then all of a sudden we switch to a different type of storytelling. And some of the themes that we haven't encountered since Genesis 1 have suddenly popped up. It's in Genesis 1 that God creates humans in his likeness. It's in Genesis 1 that God creates them male and female. This is picking up where Genesis 1 stopped off. A really interesting thing here. This is the list of the descendants of Adam. Who's missing?
Cain.
Abel.
Cain and Abel, right? Cain and Abel are missing from this list. If you actually stop and think about it, well, we've already told that story, but the other storyteller doesn't really want, gets us, the other storyteller has already gotten us to Lamech. So this is it's a different narrative, and it's just the way it is. And as we go through, you'll see the things that this narrator thinks are important is getting the line through. Also seems to think that these we haven't encountered any of this with the years, right? Until now. This is out of left field. Like, we didn't know anything about how old Jubal was, or Jabal, or Cain, or Abel. We didn't get any of that. But now we know how old Adam was. We know how old Seth was. We know how old this. And so at the days of Adam, after he became the father of Seth, were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Were they after Seth? Were they Cain and Abel and others? It never tells us. But Cain and Abel are not listed here. And, you don't have to take my word for it. It's fine. But it does feel like a different narrator. And thematically, that whole business with the Lord has also stopped. Right? Now we got God again. And that's not always guaranteed. But for the most part, the previous narrator likes to talk about the Lord. And this person likes to talk about God for the most part, and likes to talk about humans in general, right? And this solves our issue, right? This is the list of Adams. When God created humans, all of them, he created the male and female and blah, blah, blah. But the ones we care about are Adam and his line. So Adam goes through. And again, image and likeness is a theme from Genesis 1, not really Genesis 2, 3, and 4. So this whole image and likeness thing pops up again. So we work through Adam, we get Seth, we get Enosh. As I said earlier, some of the names are suspiciously similar to the previous set of genealogies. We get Kenan and Melissa, keep going when Kenan.
When Kenan had lived 70 years, he became the father of Mahalalel. Kenan lived after the birth of Mahalalel 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. Mahalalel lived after the birth of Jared 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he became the father of Enoch. Jared lived after the birth of Enoch 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after the birth of Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. Methuselah lived after the birth of Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he became the father of a son. He named him Noah, saying, "Out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands." Lamech lived after the birth of Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Great. Okay. Thank you for reading the whole chapter. Very good.
It's a lot of numbers.
Yeah, so gonna go
Why?
back. It's a lot of numbers and a lot of names. Gonna go back quickly just to take a look at some of the cast of characters. Earlier we had Enoch. Later we have Enoch, for what that's worth. Mahujael, Methusael. We had Jubilant, but Mahujael and Methusael. In here we have there's Enosh. Um, we have Mahalalel, not Mahujael, and we have Methuselah, not Methushael. The other one was Cain's list and got to Lamech. This is Seth's list. Similar names, different pattern with all these years, and gets us to Lamech. For what that's worth. Okay. If you were paying attention, there was, I hate to say it, there wasn't anything particularly interesting in what Melissa read, pretty much from start to finish, except for image and likeness of God, the shockingly large number of years, and then when we got to Enoch, which was really fascinating, right? If you're a year counter, this dude, Methuselah, is the oldest person in the Bible. So if you care about those things, that's where the expression old as Methuselah, if you've ever heard it, comes from. He is the oldest guy. He is, I think he ends up at 969. It says it somewhere. All the days. Yeah, 969. So there's your Jeopardy trivia thing. Who's the oldest person in the Bible? It's Methuselah. And it's probably no coincidence that Methuselah has one of the most special people as his child in the Bible, which is Enoch. There is
Wait,
literature.
Methuselah. Enoch was the father of Methuselah. I thought you said it the other
Oh,
way.
no, so I had it backwards. Yep, I had it
Because
backwards.
I thought that the interesting thing too was that Enoch walked with God and God took him, and
Right.
everyone else just died.
Right. No, I had it backwards. Methuselah is Enoch's kid. So Methuselah lives the longest, but Enoch is the other thing that's special there. Charlotte, you got a question, I think.
Yes. How are we counting these years? I mean, seems extreme. I mean, are there like, 5 minutes in each year? I mean, how are we equating that?
How they're giving you years, and they're shockingly exact. And we just had St. Thomas Aquinas Day in the church yesterday. Now, he only lived 1,000 years ago,
Oh, wow.
and they don't know what year exactly he was born. I'm just going to throw that one out there. Like, this is shockingly good record keeping coming from the beginning of creation in terms of exactly how long these people live. So I would argue that the point here is that things were different. That's the point, is that, and when we get through with this, we end up with the flood. Nobody lives after the flood longer than 120 years. That seems to be pretty close to today, right? Like you do encounter, and then the Psalms will say, generally most people live 70 or 80 years. Again, that goes back a couple thousand years. That's pretty close to today, even with various medical advances and what have you. People are still not living any longer than 120 years max. And that's really, really rare when it happens. Most people live into their 80s, basically 70s, 80s, maybe 90s. So I don't know what to do with these years other than to tell you that things were quite different. It's antediluvian is the word that gets used, which is pre-flood. So the antediluvian stuff, pre-flood. These people, when creation started, it was different, and something changed after the flood. That's the best way to think about it. If you try to deal with exact years and this and that, and you can do this, you can track the years all the way back through. You run into a lot of problems. I think one of the problems is that Methuselah is still kicking around in the time of Abraham, theoretically, which is kind of interesting. The flood is a problem in this narrative too, because if everybody is wiped out by the flood, Some of these people seem to still be kicking around. There's some problems with the narrative. So do what you want with it, I would say. But I think the best thing is things were different before the flood happened. And Enoch is also different. Enoch walks with God. He's one of two people in the Bible that doesn't die. Enoch is one. Well, it doesn't say he does, at least. God takes him. You could say that God just took him because and he died. It doesn't seem to, considering everybody else says he died. Anybody know who the other person in the Bible that is taken by God?
Elijah.
Elijah. Yep, he was up in the chariots of fire. In uh, Catholic tradition, primarily Christian tradition, yes, but in Catholic tradition, same thing happens with Saint Mary the Virgin. She is assumed bodily before death into heaven. The Orthodox tradition is that she kind of falls asleep, and the Episcopal tradition, I think, says God took her. So it's not all that different. But in the Bible, it's Enoch and Elijah. And this is a different thing. Enoch walks with God, and as Melissa read, he walked with God, and then he was no more because God took him. And this, again, chicken and egg thing, which comes first? There's a lot of other literature out there that's really quite old about Enoch. There's books that you can read on Enoch that are a little later that are non-biblical books, but they're also really old. So there's something special about Enoch, and it either comes from this narrative or it's something special. Do you remember what Enoch did before the Cain line? Enoch built the city, right? So Enoch was the first person to build cities, and so he's important in both lines. Methuselah, we get to Lamech, right? This gets us back to Lamech, which is strange if you actually stop to think about it, because one line was Cain, this one's Seth. They both end up at Lamech with similar names. And Lamech gets us to Noah. This is slightly out of left, well, this is completely out of left field in this narrative so far. We haven't gotten any quotes. This and the ground makes a resurfaces here again, and cursed, right? Out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and the toil of our hands. Ground, Lord, curse, linked to Lamech again, or sorry, Noah. It was linked to Lamech and Noah. This is our other narrator, right? This is beginning to get things getting weaved together, and we'll see. This is a great place to end because your question is probably going to be like, wait a second, up till this point, when we've talked about multiple narrators and that sort of thing, we get one story and then we get another story and then one story and another story. When we read the flood next week, this is the beginning, and this is not the last time this happens, but this is the beginning when our two strands get blended together, and it's actually possible to pull them apart really easily if you want to, and we'll actually do that next week. But this line right here is out of context, even though it's in our thing. And so it's the meaning of Noah, right? We haven't gotten any meanings in this whole line right here, right? The guy that talks about the Lord and the ground and cursed likes to also tell us what names mean. So we get an aside. Think of it like this. You've got the Melissa narrator, and then all of a sudden JD pipes in and says, oh, and by the way, out of the ground, the Lord has, right? It's a different narrator that's jumping in right here. And then we're back to the other one. Lamech lived after the birth of Noah 500 years and 95 years, had other sons and daughters, blah, 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 and he died. And Noah was 500 years old, and he had sons. That gets us to the flood. So we get to Noah actually twice. We get Noah through Lamech, and then we get Noah through Lamech. If you think about that, it happens twice right here in this paragraph. All right. Any questions on any of this? All right. Next week, I've got chat comments. I wonder what they are. L names. It's from Mary. Okay. Any questions or comments? Anything? Okay. Next week is going to be interesting. It's we're going to read the flood, and it's a lot of this kind of like multiple voices comes back into play in a way that I hope actually makes the flood far more easy to understand. If you got time this week, take a hack at reading Genesis 6, 7, and 8 and see how well you understand it. The odds are good. You know the flood. You probably know songs about it, right? Noah, 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 or whatever it is. He built his arky, right? Arky. That's I don't know if you know that song. The how long is the flood? 40 days. How long, how many animals? 2 by 2, et cetera, et cetera. But take a hack at reading 6, 7, and 8 of Genesis and just see how actually difficult it is to read through that and figure out what's going on. And I'll leave it at that. Okay? God bless. Have a great week. Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Watch the concert video online if you didn't make the concert last night. It was fantastic. All right. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Father Matt's Bible Studies and Sermons podcast. If you want to learn more, you can visit our website at christchurchpelham.org. christchurchpelham.org. God bless and have a great day.